Okay, everybody, we are getting ready to discuss chapters 40, 41, and 42. And really, we're going to read them, but we're going to do a little bit of review first. Last week at the beginning of class, we said that we could look at chapters 33 to 37 basically by talking about this one repeated promise that God made through those chapters. And what did you guys say that that was?
Restoration of Israel.
Yes, the restoration of Israel. Now, what were chapters 38 and 39 about?
Gog and Magog, God against Gog, God against
Okay.
Gog.
Either in that case, either way you say it, it works, right? God against God or God against God. So even if you don't get it right, if people don't hear it right, it works out. So one of the things that after all that work on timing and what we think, one of the things we could also look at is if you were to think that these two sets of chapters might be related in somehow, since they're in scripture in an order, right? We have this promise of restoration to Israel, and then we have the Gog and Magog war, and then we have the vision we're going to talk about this week. So, if you were going to think if there was a possible relationship at all, what do you think it might be in terms of these three sets of chapters? What's one way we kind of make our way through scripture that would be a possibility at least?
It's all in the end times or in
Chronological, right? So it could be that God is going to have this restoration of the people of Israel, and then the Gog Magog war, and then this. Now, again, everything we looked at last week might put all that on its head. We don't really know, but when I went to make this review, I thought, you know what? That is also still a possibility. So, what is the one thing though that we did decide we knew about the timing of the Gog Magog war? What do we know for sure?
It hasn't happened yet.
That's right. It hasn't happened yet. So we can kind of just let that be the place we kind of land on for now and just believe that God has some reason why he doesn't want us to know for sure when that timing is. Okay, so that's where we got to. Now we've got these chapters, and I just want to give you a little bit of help about approaching chapters like this. So you've got them here, you've got them in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and a few other places where, because of the way we study, we don't want to just blast through them the way that we would when we read, right? But let's be honest, it's a little hard to stay focused, right, on what is happening. And then it's a little difficult to get too focused. As Mary said, if you don't like math or don't want to figure all that out, it just gets complicated. And so I think the visual of the temple picture and the temple complex is a little bit helpful, but for me, it was helpful, but not as much as I would have liked it to. So, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to read all three chapters, but we're going to stop by segments. And then I'm going to show you what I do as I go through this segment. What's the only focus that I really make, and as I'm paying attention, because I want to keep paying attention, but I also want to be able to make it through without getting bogged down, stopped, or giving up. So we're going to read it in that way. And I'm not going to assign you way in advance. I'm just going to call on you guys as you come up because you'll end up reading more than once. If you can't read tonight because you're hidden like Stephanie and maybe Vicky, then I'll probably just pass you actually if I don't see your face. And that'll be easiest. So we're going to start with chapter 40. And then I have hopefully the technology is going to work tonight. I'm going to end the video after we do the reading. So if you're watching this at home, I'll tell you what you'll want to do. And the reason I'm going to end the video is that I have access to free 3D imagery of the temple, but I can't share it online. You're allowed to share it, but I can't record it. So I'm going to give what that information is for people who are watching at home, and then they can watch that on their own while we're reading or on their own. So at the point we're ready to watch the video, hopefully we will stop our video so that everybody can see that. But first we're going to read all of it so everybody can hang in with us through that. So if you want to start with chapter 40, verses 1 to 4. And again, I'm just going to do this in the order that I see everybody. So, Cheryl, can you read the first 4 verses of chapter 40 for us?
Yes. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the city was taken, on that same day, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me there. In the visions of God, he brought me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain. And on it, to the south, there was a structure like a city. So he brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze, with a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, and he was standing in the gateway. The man said to me, Son of man, see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and give attention to all that I am going to show you. For you have been brought here in order to show it to you. Declare to the house of Israel all that you see.
Okay, so these first 4 verses we can actually treat the way we normally would treat these, right? We're just going to go through and see what these first 4 are about, and then if you want, you can make a segment theme listed on your margin, or you may have already done that in your homework. So who is this passage about, this section?
Ezekiel.
Ezekiel. And who's Ezekiel dealing with, or who's dealing with him? God. So it's just God and Ezekiel this time. Okay, and so what is it that's going on?
God showing him a building or something that looks like a city.
Okay, and how is that happening? How's he showing him that?
The vision.
In a vision.
In a vision. So where is this vision taking place? How is this happening? What are the
In
wheres?
Israel on a high mountain.
Okay, so he takes him to Israel on a high mountain to
To the
show him,
south.
or at least he shows him, he takes him in a vision. Now, what that means exactly, we don't really know, but he takes him in a vision. Okay, then we actually have a pretty important when in this passage. What did we learn here?
It was in the 25th year of their exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the city was taken.
Okay, so what city are we talking about?
Israel?
Babylon.
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem in Israel. Okay, so when we see that reference to a city that was taken, so did any of you might have to turn, or I know you had a question, or you might have put it in your margin. Anybody have an idea what year we're talking about now? It's been a while since we looked at one.
572.
That's 572.
The Bible does the math by calling it 573. Again, there's that sort of way they do the addition and subtraction. And in fact, these people who know how to do the math have said that it was April 28th of 573 BC, which was the first day of Passover. So that's sort of an interesting little tidbit about when God gave him this vision, when you think about where we're going to head. So we've got where, when. Okay, the one thing we've missed is why. We're told why God is doing this.
Because he wants to have Ezekiel declare it to the house of Israel, everything that he sees.
Yes, in fact, this is just a great verse to kind of know, right? What does he tell him to do? These 3 things.
Declare what you see.
See with your eyes.
Hear with your ears. And give attention.
Give attention, right? We could all do that, right? We should all be doing that. And hopefully we are as we study the word this way. Okay, so that's our usual way that we approach segments, and that's how you kind of get a segment theme. Now, when we start these next ones, what we're going to do is, again, we'll read the segment and then we're going to stop. And what I did as I read this is in my margin, I just put what is the description about? What is the main focus, or what part of the temple complex are we talking about? And that is all I did so that I could track through, okay, this segment is about this place. I didn't worry about the measurements or anything. I looked at my complex picture as I went through the first time to see some of the size. But so as we go through, that's all you really need to do for segment theme. So in your margin of your worksheet, as we read, just look to see what is that. I keep wanting to say furniture. That's not the right thing. What's the room or what's the place that's being described? You might list 2 or 3 sometimes, but you don't want to list all those details because then you'll just be rewriting the passage. Okay, so we're going to read verses 5 to 16, and then we'll see how it goes with that one, and then you'll get it down how you would like to do it with whatever your learning style is. Okay.
Okay.
So, Mary, would you read verses 5 to 16, and we'll see what part we're talking about.
Okay. And behold, there was a wall on the outside of the temple all around, and in the man's hand was a measuring rod of 6 cubits, each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. So he measured the thickness of the wall 1 rod and the height 1 rod. Then he went to the gate which faced east, went up its steps, and measured the threshold of the gate 1 rod in width, and the other threshold was 1 rod in width. The guard room was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide, and there were 5 cubits between the guard rooms. And the threshold of the gate by the porch of the gate, facing inward, was 1 rod. Then he measured the porch of the gate, facing inward, 1 rod. He measured the porch of the gate 8 cubits, and its side pillars 2 cubits, and the porch of the gate was faced inward. The guard rooms of the gate toward the east numbered 3 on each side. The 3 of them had the same measurement. The side pillars also had the same measurement on each side. And he measured the width of the gateway 10 cubits, and the length of the gate 13 cubits. There was a barrier wall 1 cubit wide in front of the guard rooms on each side, and the guard rooms were 6 cubits square on each side. He measured the gate from the roof of the one guard room to the roof of the other, a width of 25 cubits from one door to the door opposite. He made the side pillars 60 cubits high. The gate extended round about to the side pillar of the courtyard. From the front of the entrance gate to the front of the inner porch of the gate was 50 cubits. There were shattered windows looking toward the guard rooms. Shuttered windows, excuse me. And toward their side pillars within the gate all around, and likewise for the porches. And there were windows all around inside, and on each side pillar were palm tree ornaments.
Okay, so if you go back to starting with verse 5, this one might have been easy to see because this is a place where they actually gave you one of these places to be marked. So what is one of the main focuses? What's this main area? Even though there's a lot of detail, what's the main area?
Outside of the temple.
Okay, a wall outside. Then what did you mark in this passage? You probably have a marking repeatedly here if you marked what they gave you to mark.
Gate.
The gate which faces
east.
Okay, so that was one of the things they wanted you to mark. Now that should stand out to you when we know there were multiple gates, but the one they have you marked is the gate which faced toward the east. And as you read through, you might notice that that's actually there quite a bit. So we're dealing with the gate which faced east. Were there any other parts that jump out at you or that you would also list under there? You can stop with just that, or you might have put some others.
Well, guard room cells mentions written a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
guard rooms. And you can see that on that picture. So you might have listed the guard rooms is something talked about. Those two things are measured in detail. What do you think about the amount of detail God gives about this temple complex?
Amazing detail. Just
It's a
amazing.
lot, right? You have a
Yes.
drawing in front of you. How did we get this drawing? I wouldn't want to do it, but how did we
No.
get it?
By this.
By this, because God wrote it in such detail that they could do this. Wait till you see what we're headed toward. If you think this imagery is detailed, they're actually able, because it also lists the height and the width, which we can't
Now we
even
want
see
something.
in a one-dimensional picture. When you see it 3D, we actually can make it. You could go build this just like the Ark and just like the other temples that have been able to make models. You can make a model of this because God made such detail. What does that indicate to you? If you were just to think about some of the reasons why God might have made this much detail, what would you think? We don't know for sure.
Details are important to God.
Okay,
That's
in
that,
general they are. Yeah, Jocelyn?
and, and that's how he wanted it built.
Yes. So does this look pretty real to you then? Would you assume this was going to be real?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some people that actually spiritualize this to just mean a picture of ideal worship. Does this seem like something we were supposed to spiritualize or something we're supposed to picture as a physical structure?
Physical
Physical
structure, I think.
structure.
Yeah, because you don't have to go into measured detail to talk to people about an ideal picture of worship, right? You don't have to
No.
give cubits and measurements. And so that might be one of the things God wanted to make sure we understood that this was a real design, just as the other temples were as well. I thought I had exactly down. I don't have down. Did anybody look? I know approximately. Does anybody know what a cubit and a hand breadth equals in feet, just to kind of help people out?
Around 18 to 19 inches, I believe.
Okay, yeah. What I have in my notes, at least where it says the wall is 6 cubits thick and 6 cubits high, that's about 10 feet. So little more than a foot, little less than 2 feet, right? So where you go, one other measurement, and then we're going to not do this the whole rest of the way. But where it says that the whole width and that it's a square, right? 875 feet square, and they have that on that little line for you there. That's almost like 3 football fields, right? I kind of looked up, it's 400,000 square feet just for the outer court.
Wow.
Just the
Mm.
outer court's 400,000 square feet. So you can kind of look that up to try to gauge what that is. That's a massive kind of warehouse or athletic fields. A lot of people could fit inside of an area that was 400,000, and that's just the outer court. So those are the kind of measurements we're talking about when we look at this. Okay, so
I'm
that's
glad.
all. Oh, go ahead, Jocelyn.
I was just going to say, I'm glad you explained that because as I was reading this, I go, this is so confusing. I
Yeah,
will never understand that. And
yeah.
I don't understand why God feels like he needs to tell us this, but I go, I'm just going to read it. And one day someone will explain why it's necessary to know
Well,
this.
again, I think one of the reasons is that we can see this and that other people were able to build
Mhm.
models and could build the whole thing just like they were able to build that ark. I still haven't been there. I'm hoping to get there soon. But those of you who have, what is that experience like when I've seen people's pictures and I've heard their expressions after being there. What is it like to stand there dwarfed by that thing and to know God designed it in detail.
It
It's
is,
it's a surreal feeling, especially when you come over the mountain and it's sitting down, and it's
Yeah,
like, how in the heck did they build that thing?
yeah,
And even on the inside, it makes you feel they didn't have half the modern conveniences that we have. How did they get the waste out of the boat? Where did they
right.
store the food? How did they
Yeah.
cook?
Yeah,
But seeing it really made it realistic.
yeah,
it is totally awe-inspiring. It is, uh, yes, you come up over the hill and you can see it and it takes your breath away. It's
yeah.
amazing.
So I think at the very least, God's reasoning could be that he wanted us to try to imagine that kind of feeling. And there have been models made of the other ones too. And we get the comparison to the tabernacle and the temples that had been built before this one as well to see the differences or the similarities and how that was. Really, you could take these chapters, and if we did that, if we got all the cross references and did comparisons, this could be a weeks long study, just these chapters on the temple, but that's not how we're going to approach it. So, okay. So as we read, then just be looking for that. Evelyn? Yeah.
Did you say it was, are you talking about the 875
Yes.
square
Yeah.
feet? And you
Yeah.
said how many football?
Well, when I did the math, I had to take it into yards. And so then I said it's about 3 football fields.
Well, I don't know if I misread or what, because I was reading in a commentary or something, and I have written down 13 football.
Oh, well, that may be the whole thing or something, but just
Okay.
that width alone, yeah. But the 400,000 square feet, that's just the outer
Well,
court down there.
this is the
Yeah.
875.
Yeah.
So
So,
the
and
whole thing.
I may have done it, again, my brain shuts down when it comes to some of that stuff too. And I didn't look it up. I just did the math myself. Yeah, Dee Dee.
Well, it occurs to me that, the temple, the tent of meeting and everything that went in it was that detailed. It was that detailed because he wanted them to build it. So
That's right.
it
They
kind
had
of
to
seems
build
like
it.
they sent him the detail because he wanted them to build it. Seems like
That's
at some
right.
point they're supposed to build this.
That's right. That's the other point we would take away is that when God gave these detailed instructions in the rest of scripture, it was because they literally had to build it. So that's what we would want to be believing if we just take scripture the way it's handed to us, right? The way we would read anything else is that this is here because somebody needs these plans to build this thing, right? Good
And it
point.
had to be structurally sound
And
also.
it had to be exactly as God said. So beautiful picture, and we'll see a little bit. Okay, so as I call on you and we continue, we'll read a segment. We're going to go all the way through chapter 42, and then we'll just take a minute at the end of the segment so that you can list what was being discussed, even if we don't fully understand the measurements. And you might want to glance at your temple complex if you haven't. It's hard to flip back and forth through all those other pages for close-ups, but just however you want to handle it. Okay, Janelle, can you read 17 to 19 for us?
Yes. Then he brought me into the outer court, and behold, there were chambers and a pavement made for the court all around. 30 chambers faced the pavement. The pavement, that is, the lower pavement, was by the side of the gates, corresponding to the length of the gates. Then he measured the width from the front of the lower gate to the front of the exterior of the inner court, 100 cubits on the east and on the north.
Okay,
As for
so go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I forgot, what was I supposed to read to?
Just till 19, we're going to do exact segments here. Okay, so what do we have being discussed? This was another one, these two things you were supposed to mark. Where was he brought?
The outer court.
Outer court.
Outer court and their chambers.
There's those
Facing
30
the
chambers. Yep.
And
If you want to
a
write that.
pavement.
A pavement, and then he mentions finally the
Inner court.
inner court. And a lot of times this back and forth with outer court and inner court is he's describing one and then he'll say it faces the other, right? So that's the other thing is that because these were all built to be a square, you get this thing that starts to sound repeated. It is repeated, but it's like the northeast and south, right? Or the east, yes, the east and the west and the south. So, or the north, south, and east. And so that's why also they start to sound exactly the same. So it's why it helps a little bit to label the sides. Okay, and you can see the 30 chambers, you can see those on the temple complex picture, right? Those are on the outside. There's 5 in each group, and there's 6 groups of them. So that would be the 30 chambers. You see that? If you're
Yes.
looking at those pictures. Okay, that one took me a minute to figure out. Okay, let's go on to Dee Dee, verses 20 to 23.
As for the gate of the outer court, which faced north, he has measured its length and its width. It had 3 guard rooms on each side, and its side pillars and its porches had the same measurements as the first gate. Its length was 50 cubits, and its width 25 cubits. Its windows and its porches and its palm tree ornaments had the same measurement as the gate which faced the east, and it was reached by 7 steps, and its porch was in front of them. The inner court had a gate opposite the wall of the north, on the north, as well as the gate on the east, and he measured 100 cubits from gate to gate.
Okay, so in verses 17 to now, previously we had a full description of that east gate. Now what has he done? He's rotated around and he's describing what?
North gate.
The north gate. And so you can see, and then he ends up saying, and it's just like the measurements of the east. And you can see that now when you look at the picture, it's just the same, and then it faces the inner court. So for this one, he's talking about the outer court gate facing where?
North.
North. So that's what you would want as your main description. And then again, you can add the other details if you want them. We know that there are guard rooms, and we know that on the inner court opposite the gate, it's the same reflected picture, right? And now you can see those gates lining up across from each other, and they each have their sets of guard rooms. So each one has that same picture. It is sort of like mirror imagery in a way. Okay, questions or details on that? All right, Lisa, would you read 24 to 27?
Then he led me toward the south, and behold, there was a gate toward the south, and he measured its side pillars and its porches according to those same measurements. The gate and its porches had windows all around like those other windows. The length was 50 cubits and the width 25 cubits. There were 7 steps going up to it, and its porches were in front of them, and it had palm tree ornaments on its side pillars, 1 on each side. The inner court had a gate toward the south, and he measured from gate to gate toward the south 100 cubits.
Okay, so now where has he gone? What's he describing in these verses?
The gate
The
toward
south facing gate.
The gate to the south. And again, it's an exact mirror image of the section on the other side. It has that outer gate and an inner gate. Both have their sets of guard rooms. And so they both, and then there's that pavement and that court in between. Okay, good. This is actually helping me. I'm doing better looking at the picture now as we go through it than I was earlier. Fran, would you read verses 28 to 31?
Yes. Then he brought me to the inner court by the south gate, and he measured the south gate according to those same measurements. Its guard rooms also, its side pillars and its porches were according to those same measurements. And the gate and its porches had windows all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. There were porches all around, 25 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Its porches were toward the outer court, and the palm tree ornaments were on its side pillars, and its stairway had 8 steps.
Okay, so now he stayed with what location? He's still talking about what?
Inner court.
Inner court, south gate.
The inner court south gate now. So he's focused on the inner part instead of the outer when he described it. So he went to that intersection. Okay, and now you can probably guess what he's going to go to next. If Evelyn, would you read 32 to 34?
Brought me into the inner court towards the east, and he measured the gate according to those same measurements. Its guard rooms also, its side pillars and its porches were according to those same measurements. And the gate and its porches had windows all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. Its porches were toward the outer court, and palm tree ornaments were on its side pillars on each side, and its stairway had 8 steps.
Okay, so now you see what he did. He went from the outer gates east, north, south, and then on the inner gates, he started where he was with the south. Now he went back down to the east, and I'm guessing we're going to head to the one that he didn't do the inner court yet. So that would be verses 35 to 37. Sarah, can you read that for us?
Then he brought me to the north gate, and he measured it according to those same measurements, with its guard rooms, its side pillars, and its porches. And the gate had windows all around. The length was 50 cubits, and the width 25 cubits. Its side pillars were toward the outer court, and the palm tree ornaments were on its side pillars on each side, and its stairway had 8 steps.
Okay, so now he's describing what?
The inner court at the north gate.
The inner court north gate. So now we've had the outer and inner gates of all 3 of those sides described. Okay, good. Laura, would you take us through 38 to 43? Is that where we are? Yeah.
A chamber with its doorway was by the side pillars at the gates. There they rinsed the burnt offering. In the porch of the gate were 2 tables on each side, on which to slaughter the burnt offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering. On the outer side, as one went up to the gateway toward the north, were 2 tables, and on the other side of the porch of the gate were 2 tables. 4 tables were on each side next to the gate, or 8 tables on which they slaughter sacrifices. For the burnt offering there were 4 tables of hewn stone, a cubit and a half long, a cubit and a half wide, and 1 cubit high, on which they lay the instruments with which they slaughter the burnt offering and the sacrifice. The double hooks, 1 handbreadth in length, were installed in the house all around, and on the tables was the flesh of the offering.
Okay, so this one, because of the nature of a piece of paper, is more difficult to see, but let's just label what it was. What is he talking about? What's
Offering.
A chamber?
Chamber.
A chamber for what Deanna said, right? Which is for what?
Burnt offerings.
For offerings. So a chamber for making offerings and the sacrifices, however you want to do it. And that's really all you need to know, is that there were chambers meant for making the offerings, which might be throwing you a bit considering where we're talking. What I want to encourage you to do through 40 to 42 and even into 43, hang on, right? If you've got questions, jot them down when you go through them, but just kind of wait to see what you get through in your homework by the time you look at cross references. And we'll go through and see what we think God is talking about here in this future temple. Okay, so some chambers for offerings. Now, 44 to 47, which drug? Oh, Jocelyn, would you read that one for us? Or did I go that way? Wait, that's right? Or no, Vicky, I'm sorry. Did Jocelyn, did you and Deanna read?
Mm-mm.
No, I am going that way. Okay, sorry. Jocelyn, 44 to 47. I'm lost.
Okay. From the outside to the inner gate were chambers for the singers and the inner court, one of which was at the side of the north gate, with its front toward the south, and one at the side of the south gate facing toward north. He said to me, "This is the chamber which faces toward the south, intended for the priests who keep charge of the temple. But the chamber which faces toward the north is for the priests who keep charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok, who from the tribe, I'm sorry, who from the sons of Levi come near to the Lord to minister to him." He measured the court a perfect square, 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide, and the altar was in front of the temple.
Okay, so now what's he describing? There's a couple different parts, same word, but two different kinds.
Chambers for the singers and the priests.
Okay, so there's chambers for singers, there's chambers for priests. And then we learned a little bit about who those priests are. So that's a good note thrown there in the middle. And then what's the other part that we see? Like each verse had a different piece, really. The last verse tells us about what? Verse 47.
It's a perfect square.
Okay, so we have a perfect square, and then what's the last
altar
section?
Okay.
Yep.
The altar was in front of the temple.
Okay,
Oh,
so
okay.
now we're approaching in toward the temple, which you see outlined, which looks like the shape of the previous tabernacles and temples, right? If you recognize that
Right.
design. And just in that same way, there's an altar in front of that temple. So now you're in,
Right.
we've described all the outer and we're in the inner area. Okay, good. Deanna, would you read 48 and 49?
Yep. Then he brought me to the porch of the temple and measured each side pillar of the porch, 5 cubits on each side, and the width of the gate was 3 cubits on each side. The length of the porch was 20 cubits, and the width 11 cubits, and at the stairway by which it was ascended were columns belonging to the side pillars, one on each side.
Okay, and what's being described in these last two verses?
The porch.
Porch.
Of the
The
temple.
porch of the temple. So this one's easier to see if you flip that over. The temple itself is on page 78, and then you see it, the porch labeled in front of the temple there. You see the stairs and you see the temple. Oh, and there's the measurements of what a cubit equals, 1.75 feet. So plus a hand breadth is a little bit longer. Okay?
Oh.
All right. So even though you guys didn't observe chapter 41, we're going to go through the same way and we'll just talk about the parts. And some of them are sort of a mystery to me, but we'll just label what's there and have a look at it and see where we head. So we are in chapter 41, and he just continues to describe what he sees. And now I'm over to Vicky. Would you read verse? Oh, sorry, somebody asked me a question. Is that feedback? Okay. Verses 1 to 4, chapter 41.
Then he brought me to the nave and measured the side pillars. 6 cubits wide on each side was the width of the side pillar. The width of the entrance was 10 cubits, and the sides of the entrance were 5 cubits on each side. And he measured the length of the nave, 40 cubits, and the width, 20 cubits. Then he went inside and measured each side pillar of the doorway, 2 cubits, and the doorway 6 cubits high, and the width of the doorway 7 cubits. He measured its length, 20 cubits, and the width, 20 cubits, before the nave, and he said to me, "This is the most holy place."
Okay, so what might have been a little confusing is that I couldn't see anything called the nave in our pictures. So what is the nave if you're looking there? And other translations would help with this as well.
I looked that up and I thought it was the central part of the church where the congregation sits.
Yeah, that's in new churches. The Episcopalians use the word nave, I think Episcopalians, but on this in this temple, it's the outer sanctuary, right? It's the same. If you look at the some other versions, they just call it the outer sanctuary. So you might just want to write that there.
Is that on page 78?
Yes. Yeah, it
Okay.
still doesn't, they didn't use that word. Maybe it's just NASB. I didn't look at all the translations, but I opened up one right now
Okay.
that says outer sanctuary.
Got
Let's
it.
see if NIV says it. Oh, well, the NIV calls it the main hall. So I don't know. We'll just kind of watch and see what happens. And then what's the other thing that we get reminded of about the temple? What's he call it?
Holy place.
The
Holy
most
place.
holy
The
place,
most holy
right?
place.
So we know that that's all familiar to us. Okay, most holy place. Okay, let's see. Oh, everybody shifted around. Um, okay, I'm just gonna go back up then. Cheryl, would you read verses 5 to 11?
Then he measured the wall of the temple 6 cubits, and the width of the side chambers 4 cubits, all around about the house on every side. The side chambers were in 3 stories, one above another, and 30 in each story. And the side chambers extended to the wall which stood on their inward side all around, that they might be fastened, and not be fastened into the wall of the temple itself. The side chambers surrounding the temple were wider at each successive story, because the structure surrounding the temple went upward by stages on all sides of the temple. Therefore, the width of the temple increased as it went higher, and thus one went up from the lowest story to the highest by way of the second story. I saw also that the house had a raised platform all around. The foundations of the side chambers were a full rod of 6 long cubits in height. The thickness of the outer wall of the side chambers was 5 cubits, but the free space between the side chambers belonging to the temple and the outer chambers was 20 cubits in width all around the temple on every side. The doorways of the side chambers toward the free space consisted of one doorway toward the north and another doorway toward the south, and the width of the free space was 5 cubits all around.
Okay, so what essentially is he describing in these verses?
The side
Side
chamber.
chambers.
The side chambers of what? Go to verse 5.
The wall of the temple.
The wall of the temple has these side chambers in it, which you can see now. And now you see those openings would be those 2 doorways he just ended with, right? One on the north, one on the south. There's that space. So he's describing those side chambers. What even, I can't picture it, and it seems backwards to me. Maybe we'll get a good picture a little bit later at the end of class. What's the one interesting detail about what happens to these side chambers as you go higher?
They increase.
Yeah, they get wider, right? They increase in width as you go higher, which I don't know how much. We'll see. I didn't try to draw it or measure that out, but that is an interesting detail, right? And that, of course, we can't see on this little flat drawing that we have. So that's not that helpful, but we'll see if we get some help a little bit later. All right, Janelle, I'm going to add 2 segments here. So you're reading more than one verse, and then we'll break it down. Would you read verses 12 to 14?
Yes. The building that was in front of the separate area at the side toward the west was 70 cubits wide, and the wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length was 90 cubits. Then he measured the temple 100 cubits long. The separate area with the building and its walls were also 100 cubits long. Also, the width of the front of the temple and that of the separate areas along the east side totaled 100 cubits.
Okay, now if you want to follow along with pictures, you have to flip back over to the temple complex, because in verse 12, what's he talking about?
Building that was in front of the was separate.
Yeah. So do you see so to me, I was thinking back because that's the way my brain works. So he's calling it the front. Up at the top of your page, do you see the word building in the temple
Mhm.
complex? So that's what he's describing, the building in front of the separate area, okay, toward the west. And that would be the west back up there because the east was down at the bottom of the page. So the building, and then what else? Just what is he measuring? The total of what in verses 13 and 14?
The temple.
The temple itself. Okay, so then he gives that measurement of its length and width. Okay, a lot more complicated than just the previous tabernacle and temple, right? Especially the tabernacle. Okay, let's go to Evelyn for verses 15 to 20.
Measured the length of the building along the front of the separate areas behind it, with a gallery on each side, 100 cubits. He also measured the inner nave and the porches of the court. The thresholds, the latticed windows, and the galleries round about their 3 stories opposite the threshold were paneled with wood all around and from the ground to the windows, but the windows were covered over the entrance and to the inner house and on the outside and on all the wall all around, inside and outside, by measurement. It was carved with cherubim and palm trees, and a palm tree was between cherub and cherub, and every cherub had 2 faces, a man's face toward the palm tree on one side and a young lion's face toward the palm tree on the other side. They were carved on all the house all around. From the ground to above the entrance, cherubim and palm trees were carved, as well as on the wall of the nave.
Okay, so it's easy to lose this one. Go back to verse 15, and what is it we know he's talking about?
The building.
The length of the building, and then he goes into details about it looks to me like just the parts of that building. I don't see a switch except for inner nave and porches of the court, but I think those must still belong to the building, but I'm not sure. Anybody have any insight on that? Um, but that's where he starts, is with that building. And by the way, the reason it's still called a building is, as far as I know, nobody knows what the building is for. So it's a building that I guess we'll find out someday what that building is for. Okay, 21 to 26. Maura.
The doorposts of the nave were square. As for the front of the sanctuary, the appearance of one doorpost was like that of the other. The altar was of wood, 3 cubits high, and its length 2 cubits. Its corners, its base, and its sides were of wood. And he said to me, "This is the table that is before the Lord." The nave and the sanctuary each had a double door. Each of the doors had 2 leaves, 2 swinging leaves, 2 leaves for one door and 2 leaves for the other. Also there were carved on them, on the doors of the nave, a cherubim and palm trees like those carved on the walls. And there was a threshold of wood on the front of the porch outside. There were latticed windows and palm trees on one side, and on the other, on the sides of the porch. Thus were the side chambers of the house and the thresholds.
Okay, so this one, it might just be easiest to kind of just list almost verse by verse. He seems to kind of go to some different parts. So verse 21, he's describing what?
The doorposts of the
And
nave.
then the front of the sanctuary where the doorposts are, right? As for the front of the sanctuary, it says the appearance of the doorpost was like the others. Okay, then 22.
The altar.
The altar. So now he's back out at the altar. verse 23 through 26, you kind of could give these one heading, I guess.
The doors.
Doors, right? There's nave and sanctuary, but he's describing the doors of those parts. Okay, and again, the flat nature of what we're looking at doesn't help us any. All right, let's get through 42 and then see if our technology is going to help us tonight to get a better visual of these images. So, where am I? Dee Dee, would you read verses 1 through 9 of chapter 42?
Then he brought me out into the outer court, the way towards the north, and he brought me to the chamber which was opposite the separate area and opposite the building toward the north. Along the length, which was 100 cubits, was the north door. The width was 50 cubits. Opposite the 20 cubits, which belonged to the inner court, and opposite the pavement, which belonged to the outer court, was gallery corresponding to gallery in 3 stories. Before the chamber was an inner walk, 10 cubits wide, a way of 100 cubits, and their openings were on the north. Now the upper chambers were smaller because the galleries took more space away from them than from the lower and middle ones in the building. For they were in 3 stories and had no pillars like the pillars of the courts. Therefore, the upper chambers were set back from the ground upward more than the lower and middle ones. As for the outer wall by the side of the chambers, towards the outer court facing the chambers, its length was 50 cubits. For the length of the chambers which were in the outer court was 50 cubits, and behold, the length of those facing the temple was 100 cubits. Below these chambers was an entrance on the east side as one enters them from the outer court.
Okay, so even looking at the picture, this one I'm just going to tell you throws me a bit, but we'll just write what he's talking about. So where does he bring him?
The north
outer
outer
court.
court.
Outer court, the way toward the north. Okay, good. What else would you list here?
And the chambers.
The chambers, right? Those are the descriptions that he's giving us and facing the different directions, but he uses door instead of gate for part of that description. And so I can see little openings that I think are the doors. That's kind of the best that I can do. But again, we'll see. So at least we know the parts and we know the segment of the temple he's talking about, but it gets a little bit tricky to keep up here. So don't feel bad, just kind of mark what we're talking about. Okay, Lisa, could you read verses 10 to 12?
In the thickness of the wall of the court toward the east, facing the separate area and facing the building, there were chambers. The way in front of them was like the appearance of the chambers which were on the north. According to their length, so was their width. And all their exits were both according to their arrangements and openings. Corresponding to the openings of the chambers which were toward the south was an opening at the head of the way in front of the wall toward the east, as one enters them.
Okay, in general, he's talking about what?
Chambers.
Chambers. And you can see the first direction in the thickness of the wall of the court toward the east, facing, though, that separate area and the building. So facing that way. He's talking about, I think, those inner chambers, not those outer ones that we've had. So that's what I think. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts or help for us on that? That's what it looks to me. You can see that they have some labeled 2 different sizes outside the temple, but not those outer wall chambers that we talked about before. In fact, he's going to describe what they are, and I think that's what helps us here. Fran, could you read 13 and 14? That's where we get the help we need.
Then he said to me, the north chambers and the south chambers, which are opposite the separate area, they are the holy chambers, where the priests who are near to the Lord shall eat the most holy things. Then they shall lay the most holy things, the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter, then they shall not go out into the outer court from the sanctuary without laying there their garments in which they minister, for they are holy. They shall put on other garments. Then they shall approach that which is for the people.
Okay, so now do you see the chambers in the inner court area that are labeled chambers for priests, and they're on the north and on the south? And so that's the area. And what's the point? Your homework had you mark this word through here. What is this area? How would you describe it?
Holy.
Holy.
Holy. Okay. And so much so that if they go from this inner area to the outer area, they're not supposed to wear the same garments that they wear when they're in the inner area. Some of those familiar kinds of rules for how to keep the temple. Okay, we have one segment left, and Mary, I think you were hopped out of order and were out of the way earlier, so we'll let you finish off. 15 to 20.
Okie doke. Now, when he had finished measuring the inner house, he brought me out by the way of the gate, which faced toward the east, and measured it all around. He measured on the east side with a measuring reed, 500 reeds by the measuring reed. He measured on the north side, 500 reeds by the measuring reed. On the south side, he measured 500 reeds with the measuring reed. He turned to the west side and measured 500 reeds with the measuring reed. He measured it on the four sides. It had a wall all around, the length 500 and the width 500 to divide between the holy and the profane. Cool.
Okay, so this is must be that inner court east gate, which is dividing the inner sanctuary area from the outer, because it's that division between the holy and the profane. Okay, so I'm sure now in your heads, without this drawing, you'd have a perfect picture of the temple, right? Probably not. Not if you're as visual as I am. So what we're going to do, I want to give this information for people watching before I cut the video. So there's a location. I'll try to remember to also link it in the description of the video, but it's called bibliaprints.com. You guys might want to know this too if you want to look at it again on your own. And there you can see 3D visual of the temple. So if you get to bibliaprints.com and just search Ezekiel temple, and then it's actually in 4 parts. We're only going to go through 3 tonight because one of them corresponds to chapter 43. So I'm going to end the video. Also, while I still have the video on, the homework over the Christmas break of the 3 weeks is just to finish this lesson. It's days 4 and 5. It just covers chapter 43. And actually, it should be really cool to do over that time frame or when we get back. Okay, everybody have a Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a blessed time off, and we hope to see you, or we hope you see us in January. All right, bye-bye.